kind of scary that they were able to do that so quickly, and it looked nice. So we don't know where the future is going to go, but I'm very happy to introduce my colleague today, Professor Keith Chen. Keith is a professor both in the strategy group and also the behavioral decision-making group here at UCLA Anderson. And for a time, he was the head of data science and economics at Uber. So if you know surge pricing, you can talk to Keith. He's the one who developed that model. On today's keynote, Keith is going to talk about the things that AI can do and the kind of limitations that AI still has. So welcome, Keith.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here. So how long do I have? 30 minutes? Running. Okay, I'm excited to be here. So this is an extremely fraught topic. When Sanjay asked me to come here and kind of speak with you guys, I wanted to know, like, what's the objective? We have 30 minutes together. What can we kind of really do? I'm going to try and present relatively quickly a way of thinking about kind of what all of us have experienced over the last kind of year, which is there's certain dimensions on which AI is just surprised even though it's developing it, just kind of exponentially increasing capabilities in certain dimensions. Many of us have finally started to grapple with what GPT is capable of doing, like GPT-4, GPT 3.5, and then OpenAI just dropped Sora, like this new kind of video production AI. We're going to talk a little bit about that. I think the interesting thing that I'm going to try and give us here is a framework for thinking about on what dimensions is AI progressing incredibly quickly, and on what dimensions is it not, actually. Like many researchers who are studying AI see kind of stubborn fixed points in like AI not advancing very quickly. It gives a little bit of a framework for thinking about what that is. Try to take that and then project it into the future. What parts of the labor force, what parts of the world are going to be completely different, not just for your kids, but 5 years from now, and what parts won't. Okay, and then what does that mean for the economy, labor, kind of all kinds of interesting things. So let me just quickly kind of go through here. AI is already making important decisions. This is the really key kind of thing, right? Like AI is already making extremely important decisions in many very kind of varied parts of our world. Information, I think we're all kind of comfortable with this already. What we see on social media, what goods are shown to us when we search on Amazon, what's in our kind of Facebook news feeds, what videos we observe on TikTok, all of that is now effectively completely controlled by AI and kind of machine learning algorithms. So in some sense, like the information we receive from the outside world used to be curated by humans, editors in the New York Times, now it's entirely kind of, that's in some sense entirely kind of outsourced. Justice, this is proceeding faster than many of us realize. For example, the state of New Jersey has now, largely because of kind of concerns about equity and kind of justice, has eliminated cash bail. The state of New Jersey no longer has cash bail. You get arrested, you can't just kind of buy your way out of jail before your trial. Now what New Jersey has is they use an AI to predict failures to appear and failures to pay, right? If I've arrested this person, I'm going to allow an AI to decide whether or not what is the probability this person is not going to show up for the court date. Okay, what's the probability that if I release them, they're going to recidivate into another? I'm going to have to arrest them again before the court date, and not cash. Your ability to pay, but like this AI determines whether or not you sit in jail between now and your court date in the state of New Jersey. Health, AI is already performing at the 78th percentile of radiologists. You take an image, like a picture of your lungs, and you ask, like, does this person have lung cancer? Basically, kind of already now, better than kind of 78% of people who have spent their lives like looking at those images, AI can do a better job predicting than that. Pretty soon, it's just going to be better than 100%. That's almost certain by the end of this year. Movement, we're all sitting, we're very close to Santa Monica, where for over a year you could hail a completely autonomous taxi. You get into a car, there's no one sitting in the front, it just takes you wherever you want to go. Just last month, that was approved for the whole of Los Angeles. So you want to take an autonomous ride hail? You can. Agriculture, fully autonomous farms are now kind of fully online. So you've probably seen some of these videos we're all kind of comfortable with seeing tractors kind of drive through fields, towing kind of spraying arms and stuff like this. Now there are these huge boxes on the back of these tractors. They drive through the fields. What's going on under? Computer vision and AI is basically making a real-time map of where every carrot growing on every square inch of the farm is. It identifies weeds. It can tell better than a human very quickly. This is a trivial problem for a computer. What's a weed versus what's a carrot? And it's zapping the weeds with lasers and spraying the carrots with fertilizer. Right? It's now running at speeds of about 200 times faster than you can do that by human. Right? Like just tractor drives through, everything kind of happens. Okay? We're gonna think a little bit about what jobs, what's at risk from AI. I'm from my background, I'm kind of particularly interested in the 3% of Americans who drive for a living, because I think pretty soon that's over. And I want to give a little bit of a way of thinking about what more broadly than that, like what's next, like what falls next. Okay, well, and I know a lot of this audience is particularly interested in entertainment, so I'm going to focus a little bit on that. In order to do that, I want to think a little bit about kind of how do you think about what AI is doing, okay? Ted Chiang, like a kind of a relatively famous, that's insulting, a famous kind of science fiction author, calls GPT and kind of the experience of that effectively lossy JPEGs. They're imperfect compressions of the world. So you can think of ChatGPT as kind of a lossy JPEG version of the entirety of the internet. And I like that metaphor because, like kind of JPEGs, it's an imperfect compression technology, and you see these artifacts sometimes where they just kind of like fill in where the data is missing. And when AIs hallucinate, they can feel a lot like that. Alison Gopnik, kind of a cognitive scientist, instead thinks of them as kind of cultural technologies, like writing in libraries and internet search engines, or just ways of translating large bodies of human knowledge, making them usable and just kind of like allowing them to communicate across people. But what's interesting is that that's not what people who develop AI and who have been programming AIs think is the most natural kind of analogy for what they are. And it's amazing how quickly this is completely taken over. And I think it's interesting to think about this analogy. AI is a shrug-off, okay? Because it's what people who work in the industry find most compelling. What is a shrug-off? It's this like H.P. Lovecraftian image of this effectively unknowable monster. What is? I'm not going to kind of summarize the literature. But the memes, which kind of convey this, is that people who develop AI think of this as the AI, and this is the these are kind of inside jokes, reinforcement learning from human feedback. These are the things we try and the kind of controls we try and layer on top of the AI to make it not hallucinate, to make it not kind of compare humans to Hitler, to not do kind of things we don't like about it. But effectively, the kind of key idea here is that people who program AIs no longer feel like they're programming. The analogy is they feel like they're summoning, like they're wizards who understand that in some way I created this thing or I summoned it into the world, but I don't understand how it thinks, and I'm surprised by its power. Okay? I think what's what's most interesting is that philosophers have also picked up on this and said that in some sense, when we turn over control of our world to these new kind of creations, and we're surprised by that in some sense that's not a new experience. That in some sense we've been doing that for a long time. This is a meme where kind of this shrug-off, is replaced by Hobbes' Leviathan. The basic analogy here is that the first industrial revolution, effectively when we left feudalism, we did the same thing. We turned over to kind of modern capitalist economies, and these complex economic systems, control of our collective lives in a way that we didn't entirely understand. Okay, maybe that's depressing. Let's, moving on from that, using these analogies, let's think a little bit about what the best AIs fail at. Okay, we've just talked a lot about their kind of capabilities, and I'm going to have to put very precise dates on every kind of example because anytime you kind of like look at these things, like this thing is moving so fast. So examples from GPT-3 in 2020, okay? AIs fail terrifically at psychological reasoning. So just, think about an AI as like very fancy autocomplete. ChatGPT, we kind of all understand that. Ask ChatGPT to summarize, like everything we know about the wave function in quantum physics. It does an amazingly good job, all right? Ask GPT, Janet and Penny went to the store to get a present for Jack. Janet says, I'd like to buy Jack a top. Don't get Jack a top, says Penny, he has a top, all right? Ask GPT to continue, and it says nonsense. It says like, he has a top, he will get a top, I will get Jack a top, says Janet. It completely misses the logic of like one person explaining to the other, you shouldn't get Jack a top because he already has a top. Or physical reasoning. You have a small dinner party, you want to serve dinner in the living room, the dining room table is wider than the doorway, so to get it into the living room, you will have to remove the door. You have a table saw, you cut the door in half and remove the top half. It has no kind of deep model of what a living room is, or like what a table, the physics of a table feels like, or like how one, if you intend to kind of have more people in the dining room, like what that is. And the idea here is kind of, I think very much resonates with the Shoggoth model. One way to think about like these AI models and these deep learning models is to think of them as, I feel this way a lot actually. I have a 3-year-old son, and like watching my 3-year-old son learn is a lot like what I feel like when I train an AI model. Is that in some deep sense, like, these AIs are kind of these unknown, kind of almost Martian intelligences, and what you get back is a deep sense that both, they're learning incredibly fast, but that in some sense they see us as completely alien and are incapable of kind of forming what humans actually quite naturally do, very simple physical models of the world and very simple psychological models of other people. Let me give you some, I'll skip that. Let me give you an example, okay? Okay, so we're all kind of interested in, this was just this, not 1 month ago now, so it already feels kind of like outdated, but this is one of OpenAI's kind of premier examples from Sora. Okay, so the prompt that generates this, and let's actually look at, a stylish woman walks down a Tokyo street filled with warm glowing neon and animated city signage. She wears a black leather jacket, a long red dress, black boots, carries a black purse, sunglasses, red lipstick. She walks confidently and casually. The street is damp and reflective, creates a mirror effect and colorful lights. Many pedestrians walk about. You just ask Sora, turn that into a video. Okay, that description. And this is what it generates. Let's just watch this for a second. What do you think? It's pretty awesome, right? To get you in the right mindset of like, how do you think about the capability and how do you think about its weaknesses? Like, in some deep sense, Sora has basically watched every video on the internet, but without having lived life as a human. So I want you to think about it as almost like, as if a Martian was a superhumanly intelligent Martian, just watched every video on the internet, okay, without context, and then connecting those words made this video. What are some flaws that you see? Well, first of all, if you look at the signage, like none of those are real words, okay? Like if you like what is that? That's not Korean, that's not Japanese. It just kind of looks like what a Martian thinks Korean and Japanese or some kind of scripted Asian language looks like, okay? The arm looks very strange. Like, it's seen a lot of arms in sleeves, but it doesn't quite get how they articulate, because it has no experience of having an elbow, okay? If you look at when people are supposed to mill about, like if you pay attention to kind of the people in the background, they feel a little weird, like they have no purpose, like they just kind of seem to be zombies kind of like following this woman through the street, okay? Let me kind of give you another example that kind of, I think, maybe illustrates this even better. Okay, so here's the prompt. A person in 1930s Hollywood sits at a desk. They pick up a cigarette case, remove a cigarette, light it with a lighter. The person takes a long drag, sits back in the chair. Golden age of Hollywood. I want to give you a sense of like what, you know, you're trying to give Sora a sense of what the video should look like. Black and white film style. All right, sorry. Can you play this? Sorry, just. Okay, we'll watch it on repeat for a second. So, Sora clearly gets that you want this person to smoke, but it doesn't quite know how smoking works, right? Like, it's seen enough smoke in videos to get what smoke is supposed to look like, but the physics of when you put the cigarette in your mouth, you bring the lighter up to the thing, you take a drag, and that's what produces the smoke. Like, the physics of that, the world model is missing, okay? The world model is missing. You can look at for some other things, right? So for example, it's seen a lot of picture of old-timey telephones. If you look closely, it's got two handsets. The cable plugs into the lamp. You know, there's various realistic looking things on the desk, but if you look carefully, it's not clear at all what those things are. Right? They're like things that kind of look like hole punchers or stuff like this. But I mean, you can think about this like if you showed your kid a floppy disk or like an old Atari system, it would it's kind of like a child trying to figure out like what the hell is this thing, kind of thing, right? From an outsider's perspective. Okay. So the deep issue here is that in some deep sense, like these AIs, they're operating without a world model. Okay? Like if we're almost kind of like, inductive learners about our world, they're kind of deductive. They just kind of like looking down on the world, they just recognize kind of patterns. People seem to like to put these tubes in their mouth, and then like white billowing smoke comes out of them. The psychological components are some of the most kind of weird. Let me kind of like show you this. The last video. A grandmother with neatly combed gray hair stands behind a colorful birthday cake with numerous candles and a wood dining room table. Expression is one of pure joy and happiness. Okay, well, we'll see whether that's what's reflected in her face. Happy glow in her eyes, several happy friends, family sitting at the table can be seen. Those people are out of focus. So listen, it's really getting the kind of staging, it's getting the composition. I mean, it's learning from some pretty good videos, right? Like, can we play this one? Okay, just watch it on repeat. Okay? What exactly are you supposed to be doing when you parse your lips near a candle? Like, what happens? Here, play it on repeat again. Look at the people celebrating in the background. Okay, this is the real thing. Like, what are they doing with their hands? Like, what are you supposed to be am I clicking my fingers at you somehow? Like, I'm not sure what I'm communicating. Am I sign language? Am I clapping? Like, what's happening? Okay? And I think the thing you have to understand is that, if you don't actually have an intuitive psychological model of a human, right? This is what, a party looks like to you, right? What's interesting is, what AI is almost teaching us. It's what does a Martian psychopath think a birthday, is, or, looks like, or is doing, right? It's exactly this kind of, so, one way to think about this, okay, let's think about those as the kind of limitations, and then let's think a little bit about future of entertainment kind of production. Already, many people in this room already know, take a show like The Mandalorian. Already you have kind of actors basically walking in these rooms that are just huge, the walls are just OLED screens. And everything that's in the world around them is just being kind of produced, right? You don't have to film in a desert anymore. It looks better if you film them in a big room that's just coated in OLED kind of monitors, right? In some deep sense, you could think within a few years, all right, the entire if you ask an AI, take this book and produce a first shot movie script from this, trivial, okay? Because that's compression, right? That's taking a lot of information that's already in the book and just kind of morphing it into a new form and actually producing, in some sense, less information that's in the whole thing, right? Producing the backdrop, behind the actor, where people are going to be like kind of real actors are going to be interacting in the front. Trivial, right? Like it can do that, like from really really simple descriptions, right? What it's not going to be able to do, right? What it still seems like is going to be really really far off, right? Is any task where in some deep sense what you need is a rich world model, right? Like it's not gonna, I'm a huge Christopher Nolan fan, right? It's not going to be able to replace, in some deep sense, like, anyone who has to ask a question like this story, like, what is psychologically rich and interesting about this? And what, like, small perturbation of our real world would make this particularly interesting to people who actually have, like, a real human model of this world. And so, in some deep sense, it's like the people who are going to win tremendously from well, first of all, the whole industry becomes, infinitely more productive. But, the real winners are people who have that, who really, really have that deep world model. Because in some deep sense, like everything that doesn't require that deep world model is going to become completely trivial. And anything that requires that deep world model and is a complement in kind of producing kind of these interesting kind of things to kind of automated tasks that don't require the world model are going to be I don't have a lot of time, right? Actually, I have like 15. I have 15? Okay. I could talk a little bit about like what firms. Let me skip past this for a second because maybe I can come back to this. Like, other amazing things that this actually was just from this week. New generative, like big changes that are coming, new generative models. I think you go into this kind of industry if you were a huge science fiction fan when you were a kid. One cool, besides transporters, which are the coolest technology, the second coolest technology, from Star Trek, okay, maybe phasers, but the universal translator. These pins you put on your lapel, and you can just talk with anything, anyone, any kind of species. Just this week, generative AI model. Facebook / Meta, now we're supposed to call it, shows this amazing, shows this amazingly advanced kind of thing. But actually, would you play the left video? I won't even spoil it.
So glad you're here. I am so happy to see you. Me alegra mucho que estés aquí. Me alegra mucho verte.
So that the first part of that clip was the person speaking in English. The second part of the clip was an AI attempting to translate what that person said into Spanish, matching their voice, matching their tone, and matching the emotive mood of what they're saying. Okay? Like Google Translate has already been great. It's great for years at taking text, right? Like one of my favorite authors, Haruki Murakami, writes in Japanese and has this effectively professional translator, Jay Rubin, who has spent his life trying to say what should Haruki Murakami feel like in English? And translate his books into English. We all read, in some sense, Jay Rubin's compression of Murakami, not like Murakami, if you're reading him in English, right? Already 4 years ago, if you were to randomly show people Google Translate's translation of Haruki Murakami, 2 times out of, not to insult Jay Rubin, 2 times out of 3 people prefer to Jay Rubin's translation, okay? The real advance here is that it's starting to get better at just in real time, taking what you're saying and just basically transforming your voice and your emotive tone into a different language, right? And spoken. You can see, can you play the right-hand one? Just whisper it. Maybe that video was too quiet to hear, but so think about the advantages that Zoom is already kind of bringing us in terms of kind of being able to communicate across great distances. Now imagine that you can Zoom with anybody in the world, no matter what language they're speaking, with effectively zero latency. They see you speaking Japanese, and you see them speaking English. And it just feels, you know, completely natural. Okay. Let's get to that. So let's talk a little bit about kind of, you know, big changes that we can see kind of coming. This was a project that I was on the kind of planning committee and they headed up before it failed for various reasons. We had to sell it. But kind of, for a long time at Uber, we had to think hard about, well, self-driving technology is getting better at a very fast pace. Yes, it didn't get better as fast as we had hoped, okay? But how do we think about kind of obviously having to pivot our core business model away from being a two-sided platform where we don't own the cars and we just connect kind of human drivers with human riders and help them kind of interact with each other, which we were already using a tremendous amount of AI to kind of help mediate that interaction, to a slightly different model where what would probably have to become the case is that it would be efficient for us to own the cars, because these cars are quite expensive, right? That's like a $200,000 SUV where over half the cost is just like the equipment on the roof, right? In some sense, let's replace an extremely low fixed cost but high marginal cost technology for providing rides. That is like the human driver brings their car, but they cost Uber, say like roughly kind of $2 or $3 a mile to produce a trip, with a very high fixed cost but extremely low marginal cost technology for providing rides. This $200,000 car would then cost like 15 cents a mile to provide rides. Okay. This is not this is not reality. Like I said, like within the last month, this turned on all for the entirety of LA. Anyone here, if you want, you can download Waymo, right, the app. And a car will arrive with nobody in the front seat. It's quite eerie, okay? And it'll drive you to, it'll drive you to wherever you want to go, take you to the restaurant in downtown LA, okay? Let me say, like, in terms of like thinking about what that disrupts, many of you probably already have, okay, so this is the kind of, ride hailing is kind of, in some sense, the closest and easiest to experience kind of way that this may change, the way that kind of we get around cities, that we kind of like move around the world. What is the potential impact of that? I mean, 40,000 people a year in the United States die in motor vehicle accidents. If this is even, when this, Waymo is currently, kind of already at a point where it's probably about twice as safe as that, right? So that's alone like 20,000 people in the United States next year, if this kind of technology becomes quite widespread, that don't die. That's a pretty big thing. But to tell you the truth, I think the larger and almost immediate impact is, whereas this technology is still kind of, like we said, like, 78% of radiologists, where this technology is already, still maybe about like the 60th, 80th, somewhere between the 60th and 80th percentile of human drivers. This technology, like putting fully autonomous kind of large distance shipping trucks, that's already basically at the 100th percent of human ability. Why? Because driving on a highway is a much simpler problem than driving on a city. And the problem, the thing that causes failures amongst human drivers is not like some complex reasoning task. It's like falling asleep or losing attention, right? Like a human driver just has a hard time like doing this task. The 14th hour they've been doing it, like, on the road, okay? But being able to replace that with like, you put $100,000 on an SUV, right? That's a big kind of change. These trucks are already super expensive. Putting $100,000 worth of technology on one of these trucks, maybe keeping the human driver inside, but letting them be kind of doing kind of, logistics, kind of, planning routes, working through packages and kind of thinking through things in the back. That's already an extremely kind of cost-effective kind of technology. How do you think about that as kind of displacing? Well, the political economy of that is pretty bad. Let me give you kind of an example of this. So this is like, from the census ACS data. What I'm showing you here is a map of the United States, where what I've just placed on top of every state is in the US Census, what is the most common job of somebody who lives in that state? Right? There's a couple of interesting things that jump out here. Washington, D.C. is the only place where lawyer is like the most common job. Utah, it turns out, is like remarkably full of software developers. Alaska, maybe that's as far as primary school teachers, right? In like the Northeast, like there's a lot of that too. There's aging states with like nursing aides are kind of like the most common thing. But what's interesting here is that the vast majority of the landmass, and in fact the vast majority of the electoral college votes in the United States, the most common job in those areas is truck driver. Okay? So if you want to think about like the most immediately politically fraught or shocking kind of impact of AI is what happens if within the next 5 years, like that job just ends, right? Like it no longer makes sense for a human to do that, right? What political effect does that have? What impact does that have on kind of like how accepting people are going to be of the technology? Yeah, that's what I think is kind of, that's probably like, from a political economic perspective, like the largest impact of AI within the next kind of like few years. Okay, let me say like, what are, maybe I could take questions, or I could, like, let's go, we got 5 minutes. Okay, I think 5 minutes is already too little to take questions. Yeah, thank you guys very much. I'm happy to take questions further.
Any questions for me?
I've always had a question that, should the government play any role in the regulations of AI? Because the more the AI, the more it will replace human beings, and the more the unemployment will be there in the country. So should the government play any role in this?
Well, okay, so it's an interesting question. I think there's a couple of potentially important roles for government regulation here, right? I think the most obvious is going to be, and I think the thing that a lot of attention is being paid to, is the worry of kind of like misinformation and just like rapid transformations of our information channels. Okay? Like, a lot of and this is kind of nerdy, but a lot of software developers basically say, well, now that, we let people just watch videos like crazy, right? Like, this is like, oh, whatever you want. And it seems perfectly natural, like, pull up a video on your phone and just kind of watch it. But we don't like computers. We understand that it's incredibly dangerous if you let any computer just immediately download software that, that's been completely unverified and just run it. But in some sense, like when you watch these videos, you're kind of running software that somebody else wrote without checking it on your own brain, right? And then the question is like, as the technologies for like really understanding how that kind of affects your cognition, what it impresses you with, and kind of stuff like this, like, I think there is going to be a tremendous amount of, deep, hard thinking about what, if we can basically kind of really train AIs to understand like what is very kind of gripping to the human mind, right? Like what is like, what maximizes engagement, and then we kind of unleash that, and because of generative models, like the kind of production cycle of that and the iteration cycle of that becomes just kind of trivial. That's obviously going to be like something we have to think hard about. What I just talked about in terms of kind of labor, traditionally economists think, well, we should, in every previous epoch, kind of, major technological advances create more jobs than they destroy, because, the degree to which everybody becomes just increasingly more productive, because the things that we're good at are just complements to the things that technology happens. So it's a whole labor augmenting technology, suggests that we really shouldn't try to hold back kind of the development, or really trying to do that. I think that's also true with this technology, right, kind of AI, kind of like I just said. On the other hand, like the possibility of incredibly rapid displacement may be something that we need to think hard about. Like I've said, like if over 5/6 of the US landmass, like is suddenly going to experience kind of, you know, the main job that people do in those regions, like just disappears, like that's pretty disruptive and important to kind of maybe keep that through. Yeah, other questions?
So, the jobs that you showed on the map, displacing trucks, truck drivers, and retail, are pretty rudimentary, kind of go and
Yeah.
just do. What about business decisions and staffs, legions and legions of staff that prepare all of the staff work, with pros and cons, and research and everything? When on the curve does AI be in a position to ask the right questions?
When does AI, well, okay, so one way to think about your question is we perhaps have never experienced, like, you know, the US produces, 6 times more food, than we did kind of 100 years ago, but we employ like 20% of the workforce doing it, right? Like, so, we're kind of used to somewhat more routine tasks being displaced, right? What happens when like there's no longer a thing called a radiologist, right? Or no longer, like various kinds of what we used to think of as relatively high skilled jobs, like lawyers. What happens if like basically it's just done, like that, certainly like paralegal, right? Like what happens when that's basically over. I think in some sense what we're experiencing already, what a lot of us are experiencing with ChatGPT and kind of generative models and the rapid kind of advance, Sora kind of examples of this, is we're learning a lot more maybe uncomfortable facts about what things that like we've been doing all along that in some deep sense are not that hard, like are basically just like summarizing a whole bunch of stuff that, without really having to understand it very deeply, summarizing a whole bunch of stuff that you've just kind of like
Spreadsheets.
been asked to read, comb through, I think the way to think about the future is we're gonna have to grapple with that answer to that, the potentially quite uncomfortable answer to that question, like very quickly, very soon, because yeah, like it's gonna be inescapable. Like what you're doing, like can easily be done by a chip no more powerful than what you carry in your smartphone, and 200 times faster than you can do it.
Would the AI be able to look at situations for a company and say, what are the critical business decisions that we have to confront operationally, strategically, etc.?
It's almost impossible to answer that question fully, but what you should think is which of those decisions that like we think about like high level decision makers and firms having to make actually are quite in some sense routine, and which of those decisions are actually like quite difficult. And we have intuitions about that. The answer will become obvious quickly.
Okay, Keith, we could go on and on.
Sorry, yeah.
Thank you so much. So it's also my pleasure to introduce Jay Tucker. Jay is the executive director for the Center of Media, Entertainment, and Sports. We work together very closely, and Jay's put together a very interesting panel that's going to discuss the impact of AI on the entertainment industry. So, Jay?
Okay, so I'm the expert at not being the expert. So I brought in a few friends to come and talk a little bit more about how artificial intelligence and technology innovations in general are impacting the entertainment sector more specifically. So as my panelists get mic'd up, if you want to do that, Andy, let me just say a few words about where we are right now. I love Keith's analogy about summoning some creature. I don't know how many of you are Naruto fans, but like summoning jutsu, right? You got your big chief frog that gets to come out and help you out when you need it. And I think that for generations, younger generations of consumers and workers, They look at AI as an opportunity to amplify and augment what they can do. It makes them more efficient, it makes them more knowledgeable, it makes it easier to connect, it simplifies workflows. But obviously for people in the business right now, right, in established workflows, roles, jobs, etc., those people feel like, hey, you're upsetting the apple cart, right? There are some things that are changing, things that may be getting broken or disrupted that we can't bring back, we can't fix, right? That creates a lot of friction and static, you know, and a certain amount of unrest in the space across the whole industry, not just with respect to the creative community, but also in the business community, production community, et cetera, you know, across the entertainment business. So our goal today was to talk a little bit more, one, about kind of what does that landscape look like? How do people embrace technology? The technology of the day that we're talking about today, AI, like what does that do within the industry? And more specifically, you saw examples from Keith Chen, talking about Sora, but we'll get into like, how can AI be helpful? And then we'll also talk a little bit more about what does that mean organizationally and strategically for the business, right? So without further ado, let me just introduce my panelists. You've got Jeffrey Thompson right next to me. Jeffrey's currently at Oracle, but he spent time at Disney and in other places where he's been really at the intersection of technology and media. I asked Jeffrey to come here specifically for that reason because he knows more about how these things happen, right? We've gone through a few different eras from big data to AR and VR and so on, where everybody in Hollywood thought, oh, this is gonna change everything. And I'm gonna let Jeffrey talk a little bit more about what it actually changed and how much change there was and what we think this next wave is gonna look like. I've got Daisy Stahl, who's not only an entertainment banker, right? But she has worked in entertainment on the financial side for years and years and years. So when we start talking about economics and the money, you've got Daisy who will be able to talk about what does that mean in terms of business opportunity, investment, risk, and so on. And then I also asked a longtime friend, Andy Wallenstein, to come and talk as well. So I met Andy years ago. We collaborated on a big data conference back when big data was a thing, like the data was big, so thing. And since then, Andy, I mean, you know, he's done a couple of small things. He was the co-editor-in-chief of Variety Magazine. Now he started a separate division within Variety called Variety Intelligence Platform, where they do insights, special research, et cetera. And a lot of it, in fact, is focused on innovation and change and what does that mean. And they get to numbers and the data and stuff like that. So actually, I'm going to start on the end with Andy, and you know, with the question, could you talk a little bit more about kind of what you're seeing and how people are feeling about, you know, current innovation and what's happening?
Sure. AI is obviously, the impact in entertainment is topic A right now. I don't know if you guys are following what's going on right now in South by Southwest, where it seems like the conversation around there is really polarizing people. And filmmakers are having a very strong reaction to it, but a lot of the innovation types out there are also evangelizing on behalf of AI, and it's a big conversation out there. You know, I think you're seeing on the one hand people who are very scared, and understandably so, given the disruption and the displacement that it could represent. And on the other extreme, you're seeing a lot of people who are really excited about the opportunities, because there are some opportunities and the innovation that that could bring. Those are the extremes. I think what you're going to see, though, is everything in the middle is going to happen, and it's going to happen to a lot of different areas of the business at a lot of different times. This is not, it's very easy to traffic in generalities, but that's not going to be the story of AI in entertainment. And also, as new as this all is, this really is actually the classic industry story of Hollywood, which is always been the story of innovation, going back to, you know, the advent of sound and how the business changes, does get severely impacted. This is a story of winners and losers. There will be losers, and but hopefully emerging and triumphing and perhaps coming back bigger and better than ever.
Love that. So you all have been tracking this stuff Do you have any data you could share?
Yes, I do. I think it actually dovetails nicely, if we could cue up, dovetails nicely with what the previous speaker was talking about. This is fresh out of the data oven. We just ran this last week with HarrisX, one of the leading surveyors out there, and we were talking about Sora, right? First thing we wanted to know is we took some of those viral clips that you saw that Sora, OpenAI had put out there. We also took some stock footage clips that were made by actual humans. And the first thing we wanted to know is, can humans actually tell the difference between what is made by humans with a regular old camera and these Sora clips? And what we saw was, indeed, people struggled to tell the difference. And when we randomly showed these 8 clips, you can see from these results that there is certainly very easily confused returns in terms of what they can or can't see. Can you go to the next? I want to breeze through these because I want to give everyone a chance to speak. And what we also saw when we asked is, people really want to see labels on this content. And we asked them across not just video, but any kind of content that could be altered, whether it was writing, sound, music. People want to see labels, and it was part of a larger call for government regulation. And if we could now move to the next slide. Regulation in general was something that we gave them a whole number of different scenarios here. There was not one particular kind of regulation that stood out from the rest. The number one was about creating accountability rules with regard to AI outputs, but we laid out this whole different range of scenarios, and you saw even across age groups, no particular age group, obviously as the older types, I think there was more of a lean towards regulation, but even among the younger, there was a clear interest in that. There's concern out there. It doesn't matter whether you're 18 or 68, there is an interest in regulation. And lastly, one more slide. Obviously, there is a big concern about jobs. I mean, this is the strongest, clearest indication that there is a real, and look at the way the question is actually framed here, where we said, stronger regulation could stifle innovation, and that there could possibly be more jobs that could come as a result. Still, very clear indication that there is implement strong regulations to protect jobs across the board, across all demos. By the way, the QR codes are there if you want, in case we at VIP are always putting out tons of data regarding AI, so make sure you keep that up. But just wanted to give you a taste of what we are seeing. We're going to continue to follow this stuff up. We're actually going to have some more surveys coming up targeted on the industry, because consumers are one thing. We want to hear what the industry is going to have.
Thanks for that, Andy. So Daisy, we are down at the level of the consumer, and I want to talk about what this means institutionally with respect to, financing the creation of content, right? Can you talk a little bit about how AI specifically, but kind of this technology, this technological innovation in general impacts the future viability of film entertainment projects?
Sure, so just to give you a little bit of background, I've been in the space during the past 25 years, and our industry has been transforming the whole time. So back when I started, was making, and then I moved to a studio, and at the time, the studio was still selling or monetizing DVDs with Netflix. So if you think about the technology and what Netflix and their innovation and what they did, at that time, DVDs were going down. And people in our studio said, Netflix doesn't know what they want to be yet. Well, they certainly demonstrated that they took the leading step in an innovative and transformative way of viewing content, which is completely transformed how we as consumers now consume content today. So what I would suggest is with respect to technologies, we have to find a way to utilize them, monetize content, protect intellectual property, but find the balance in order to do so. So with respect to AI, I was thinking about how do we approach this in a balanced way. Fear is not productive. During those transformative years, I came to tell myself, both in banking and the transformation of the entertainment industry, be comfortable feeling uncomfortable, because it's constantly uncomfortable, not knowing where the next path is going to lead you. But if you try to think in advance, that's where you can feel balanced and positive. So last night I was thinking about all the possible ways that AI could help, rather than all the jobs that are going to be lost. So if you think just kind of top line and what AI can produce, it might have a disproportionate impact on below the line workers, right? Not above the line. But if you think about the use of AI in the day-to-day of what a producer does, a producer has to determine on an economic level whether to greenlight a project, whether it's an independent producer or a major studio. And what does greenlighting a project do? It goes back to spreadsheets, data aggregation. What is the historic performance of a specific genre, specific budget, specific talent, A, B, C, or whatever? Can AI more efficiently aggregate that data and be used as a tool for a producer or a studio to determine the budget, the genre, the talent, the how much is it going to take to make this movie? And to have efficiencies, and it's still going to get down to a gut, right? Studio executives is going to say, okay, I don't care what this model tells me. I mean, they do that already. They have a gut, and sometimes they are right, and the model is wrong. So it can be used as an efficient tool. The other aspect is if you are an independent producer with a limited budget and limited capital sources to produce your content, and how we finance content, at least from a senior banking perspective, is dramatically different than it was in 1998 when I started in film finance. So if an independent producer can utilize AI to shave down their budget because they have a limited capital source, they could shave down the budget so they're fully covered, and that budget, incremental savings, maybe a couple $1 million, is the difference between making the movie and not making the movie. That can be transformative. You can get your content made, and it's a removal of a barrier to the true independence out there.
Okay, so two things that I heard that I want to test with Jeffrey here. The first is this idea of using tech versus using your gut, right? And for me, I believe, I said the same thing with Andy back in the day about AI. I believe in the bionic gut, right? I think that if people have natural talents or natural insights, things that you understand about culture, etc., that you never kind of paper over that, right? You always want to leverage people's unique individual talents, but at the same time, if you can use technology to make them better, stronger, faster, great, right? The second piece, when you talk about the idea of using artificial intelligence as a way to streamline the cost of production, right? There's this question about, okay, so then where in production is that going to happen? How would we see the benefit, and what would that look like? So Jeffrey, I want to just test these hypotheses with you. In your experience, are there specific areas where adding technology, adding artificial intelligence, we can either enhance somebody's ability to get something to screen, or lower cost, or find efficiencies?
Thank you. I will tell you, strap on, get ready. I think that we are at an inflection point for lots of reasons. We have used, let's not we always keep saying AI. We've been using AI for a decade, right? AI is a $300 billion business globally, folks. It's going to go to about 700 billion to 1.2 trillion, depending on whose mathematics you're listening to. But we've been arguing about this and using it previously, right? We're doing audience targeting, we're doing market analysis, we're doing international, think about all the languages that we focus on in translation. chat bots every time you go to your bank now. So we're using it. There's a big inflection point that's changed. And that is Snapchat. What do I mean by Snapchat? Snapchat started using artificial intelligence to do their little teeth and their little ears and started getting AI out to the marketplace. A very easy way that kids can use. Now you go forward to ChatGPT. And ChatGPT means I'm a student. I want to do a resume. I want to talk more like Shakespeare. I can just ask ChatGPT. And in this very quick 30 seconds, it can transform what my whole end product is. So the leveraging of the inflection point that we're looking at is how these tools are used. Because on the backside, B2B, business-to-business ecosystem, we've been using AI. On the front end is now where we're like, whoa, this is going to be where the growth is. So let's go to Hollywood in particular. You guys saw that Sora video where the person prompts, a specific video on, show me something, a lady walking down the street. Do you know how much that scene would cost in a traditional Hollywood set? You know how much planning would take? That would be planned over a number of days, location, setting. That's an expensive scene, folks. Right? Are you shutting down Manhattan, New York City? Are you renting the lot of Warner Brothers? And now I have this tool that can do it in a few, 20 seconds for basically free. So now, let's be careful. We know that there's some flaws. It was released last month. There's gonna still be some flaws, right? However, so you asked the question, so we're gonna be exploring these things, we have to, right? When I started my career, I'll never forget trademark attorneys. You go to a trademark attorney to find out whether to make a movie or not, or what's the name of the movie, is it real, is it available for trademarking, and they'd say, do not use Google. Call the attorneys. Right? 5 years later, you talk to a trademark attorney, an IP attorney, they say, did you Google it? So we're at this interesting inflection point where, we're going a little, there are some real risky opportunities and challenges that we have. But what I can tell you, with my 11 years at Disney, when I was at Disney, we were focused on monetizing and firewalling content. How do we make money off of every window? How do we optimize content, right? Sony, Disney, Discovery, Warner Media, we were all, that whole crew of companies was doing the same thing. And now we are colliding our business models with technology. Our business models are colliding. We collided with YouTube, where the content is all over the world, it's free. You have to pay for anything, right? And so we've been colliding for a while, and guess what? We better figure it out. As I was driving in, TikTok got, at least the vote to ban TikTok, right? Now, whether that happens or not is not the issue. It's the fact that it's happening because of data. Data is the new gold. If I'm using it to build analytics, if I'm using it to build audiences, if I'm using it to build a movie script or something of that nature, it's super powerful because now I know markets, I know individual psychographics. Let me give you one piece, I'm going too long, but this last piece, think about diversity of content. And we talk about every time a Disney movie was released, it's going in 100 markets. A BBC documentary goes in 210 territories around the world. So think about all the languages and everything else that has to be focused on when you're launching across the zones and the infrastructure to do that. And think about the fact that now we're saying, wait, we can do this at scale pretty easily with technologies that allows us to compress our time zones and go faster. These are some of the real issues that we're confronting. I think they're going to be wonderful opportunities that are going to be risks.
Yeah, it's funny you bring up subtitling and language. There's also localization, from everything from cultural references to certain things that are forbidden in certain markets and so on. And AI can certainly rapidly enhance studios' ability and distributors' ability to make stuff ready for multiple markets without worrying about some of these things that have really tripped up folks in the past. That said, you mentioned this thing about Windows. How many of you are familiar with windows of distribution when it comes to entertainment? Yeah, so you might have to unpack that.
Yeah, if you look at any, I won't call them old school companies because every traditional media company is transforming, right? We got Macs, we got streaming, platforms all over the place. Disney has 3 or 4 streaming platforms, right? But think about how digital, we've started to move our platforms to digital direct-to-consumer streaming. So you're getting your content over your phone, over your laptop, on your connected television, where we get data from it, right? There's a big difference, right? So we're verticalizing our distribution, where if you take a look at the old school Hollywood, we would make the movie at Warner Media, right? Then you license it to a movie theater and share revenue. Then you license it to television, then you license it around the world, right? And you'd have a movie window, a theatrical window, then you'd have a DVD window, then you'd have, sometimes you have a digital window. Remember we'd have a hotel window when you used to have hotel, content? You'd have a hotel, you'd have an airplane window, so you had all these different windows to capture revenue. All those things have collapsed. When I started at Disney in 2000, we would release a movie, and the first 90 days was the US, and the next 90 days was Asia, the next 90 days was Europe. But it took you a year to release a movie around the world. Well, look at Little Mermaid that was launched last year. Launched everywhere in 3 days. Just think about the economics of that, right? And how fast you have to do things different.
Can let me take the content localization notion and take it in a very different direction, because we've been having this very sort of like big dramatic conversation about what AI can do to entertainment, and having it on these sort of very sort of big dramatic terms of the wholesale displacement of the entire production process. But we also need to talk about it in a much more sort of micro-targeted way, because that's really probably the more near-term, more realistic conversation. So what I mean by that is, let's talk about the production process as we know it, which we all know is sort of a whole series of things that happen all the way from the script writing to post-production. And there's all 20 different things that happen, right? AI can attack every little piece of that. And it's going to do that in varying degrees, at varying degrees of success. And we could have a 10-hour conversation about that. Content localization, though, when you say that, it brings to mind for me that when you talk about a near-term, realistic opportunity, dubbing, to me, represents an opportunity that's like AI, Sora, we don't even know when that's gonna be released. That's something that's like OpenAI, I think actually just this morning, OpenAI said, yeah, it's coming out at some point this year. That thing's only been like demonstrated. No one's actually put their hands on it yet, okay? So it's kind of almost like it's a fantastical notion. Now let's talk about what's happening now and real and in the marketplace. Dubbing. There are multiple actual products in the marketplace. I think one's called Paper Cup, one's called Deep Dub. Multiple software active can be used right now that can make dubbing so much easier. Unfortunately, are displacing actual human beings that, let's say you've got, product, video X, movie X that can be dubbed into hundreds of territories, and the human actors that could be translating it into Cantonese, Portuguese, they're no longer needed. Software can do it for, instead of those human beings. There's actually something called vubbing that could also do a video version of it, where, instead of just seeing, sound, you could actually transfer the human person's mouth in the video so that it could look like they're saying something as well. All these technologies are happening now. This is in the market. It can happen now, and can have a dramatic impact on how this content is monetized. So it's a very, very different example than something like Sora, which at some point it's going to happen. This is now, and it's sort of this very surgical strike in the broader production process.
Thanks for that, Andy, and you kind of hit on what was going to be my next question, which is being realistic about kind of what are the practical applications in the near term, and thinking about the adoption landscape. We know that adoption isn't uniform in Hollywood, right? Just because somebody, you know, the old expression, build a better mousetrap and the customer will beat a path to your door. For you young folks, maybe you never heard the second half of that expression. Meaning that if you do it better, if you have a better product, you don't actually have to market it. People will just adopt it. We have now hit a point where we experience what I think was Larry Downs calls Big Bang disruption, which is you have these instances of innovation where better, faster, cheaper, et cetera, but they take over the world instantly. And at the same time, you have plenty of instances where new technology is developed, but it doesn't catch on like wildfire. And there are a lot of different reasons for that. Some are institutional, some are kind of broad economic factors, some are organizational, around kind of incentives and what's at stake for the people in the organization and whether or not, from their point of view, it's better, right? It represents a better future for them, right? And so it doesn't always follow this kind of smooth hockey stick curve when we talk about adoption of innovative technology. So again, I'll start with Jeffrey, we can go down, but what do you think kind of practically are some of the things that you think we'll see in the next 2 to 5 years, and or what do you think adoption will look like this time?
Well, think about this. You know, if you would have talked to me 3 years ago, I was talking about metaverse, right? Meta changed its name from Facebook because metaverse was going to be such a big deal. Yet, the lesson of the story, anybody remember 3D television, right? Did it take off? No, only with a very niche portion of the consumer base, right? So, just like I have 2 daughters, I tell them, like, watch what people do, not what they say, right? I say the same thing here, right? We want to watch behavior, right? Watch consumer behavior. Watch if people are using this Apple, Vision Pro, or if they're using these headsets and you're starting to see them like, wow, they're walking down the street using this headsets, like we see every day if you go to the airport and just watch people's behavior. They're not reading magazines, they're on their phones looking down some screen, some article, whatever they're doing, right? Behavior matters. So what I would encourage everybody to do, watch the sales of these products, watch the engagement of these products, watch what consumer behavior is. Are they adapting, right? If I see, this sounds poor, but it sounds like, like I'm making fun, but I'm not. I'm on the board of the company called National Health Foundation, and we do research with the homeless. And let me tell you, most homeless people have a cell phone, right? You don't have anything else, but you have a cell phone. We need these things now. And so that's just a data point. And so at some point, what are we watching entertainment-wise? Now, I went somewhere just for a minute before about content, and content that has to deliver all over the world, and different types of content. My production partner, Emily Rodelis, who could not be here, she's my collaborator, and we're finding that we have opportunities because of AI that we would not have had. Think about if you have a movie, and it's a 1910 period piece, which means it's 100 years ago. Those are really expensive to produce. Think about Napoleon and Gladiator and all these types of movies. Remember Braveheart? You only see these big ones because they're very expensive. You got to bring hundreds of people and thousands of people into the sets. Remember the movie Glory back in the day? Right? Battle scenes. Think about if I'm telling a more niche story that has some diverse elements. Okay, I'm telling one about an African-American pilot in World War I. Well, I'm not going to get the budget for Gladiator. But wow, I can still tell the story by using some artificial intelligence pieces. I can use some of these efficiencies. If I'm a new filmmaker at UCLA or USC or NYU or in Chapman or any of these great film schools, guess what? I'm learning this stuff because what am I going to be chasing all my early career budget? So I'm saying watch the behavior, watch the uptake. If you notice Apple's iPhone 15, when it came out last year, what were they marketing it as? Oh, bring 5 of them, sync it up, and you can do VR, AR movies, and you can do a real movie with it. Now we know anybody in the business says, okay, you're not really going to make your movies with it, but guess what? If you're a new influencer on TikTok, you're making your movies with it, and you're going to start using 3 camera setups from Apple, and think about, you know, just think about the disruption from Kodak, right, on and beyond.
So this is where Daisy, you know, we were talking earlier about the idea that, you know, being able to find some efficiencies will make it easier for some projects to get greenlit. But from the perspective of the investor, one, how did the emergence of some of these innovations impact the approval process or the investment decision? And secondly, given the fact that we're still in the very, very early innings, how do you think about risk in that environment, right? Because presumably somebody's coming to you and telling you, oh, we're gonna do Glory, but it's only gonna cost us 20 cents on the dollar because we're gonna use these innovative whatever, but they're not tested, they haven't been proven. Like, how does that factor in?
Well, I think if we can get AI to a point, you know, to use in a greenlight model, it could impact the budget, it could impact the decision to go traditional theatrical versus straight to streaming. That is a consideration people have to make today. And they have to make that economic decision. Even if they're going to say, I'm going to do this as a producer for hire and give away my rights in perpetuity, right? Are you gonna take that economic benefit now, or are you gonna take the risk of a traditional theatrical release with all of the windows collapsing, and you're not sure what the windows that exist today, what they're gonna look like tomorrow? I mean, you can model it out. You can also model out performance in international markets. You know, so there are so many potential